So welcome to this Runecast insight into achieving complete compliance in cloud and containerized workloads with Runecast. My name is Stephen Salisbury and I'm a product marketing specialist for Runecast, and I'm joined today by two others from Runecast. So I also have with me Steve as advertised and guest speaker. So Steve, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody, and a warm welcome to you all. My name's Steve Betterson. I'm one of the solution engineers at Runecast, and you're going to be hearing from me a little bit more later on when we run through the demo of the new features. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. And surprise guest speaker, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Of course. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, my name is Markus Strauss. I'm the head of product management at Runecast. And first of all, thanks everyone for taking the time. And I will have a very small part later on in the discussion when we talk a little bit more about some of the work that we've been doing around Kubernetes and image scanning capabilities. So it's great to be here.
Thanks, Markus. Okay, so before we kick off and we have a look at what's new with version 6.2 of Runecast, I have to say I'm really excited to be showing you this today. But let's just, for those of you who've joined us who don't actually know, because we understand that some of you are new to Runecast. So if you don't really know what Runecast is about, let's just have a brief overview of that. So as we can see here, it's an AI-driven platform. So it works for us across many different aspects of our environments for vulnerability management, security compliance, and it's a platform basically which can deal with our on-prem or our cloud, and that's covering our VMware, our Kubernetes, digging into those VMware config KBs and best practice across the board. So it really is designed as a platform which can be used as one single point of view for absolutely every single environment that you have. So let's have a look at what's new in Runecast 6.2. So we've added Google Cloud Platform. So this is really exciting. We'll have a little look at that in a bit. We've also, as Markus was saying, we've introduced some new areas around Kubernetes and security and image and container scanning. And we'll have a little look as well at IT operations management integrations that we've brought in and some usability improvements. And I'm just going to talk you through those. And Steve's going to actually do that live demo for you at the end, so we can actually see this in real time and fully understand what this means for us. So let's dig in and have a look at Google Cloud Platform workloads, and just have a bit of a discussion around that area to see what's really going on. And when we think about what's happening in the in everyone's environment at the moment. So a lot of people will have on-premise and they want to start migrating to the cloud, or they already have started or migrated to the cloud. So, cloud adoption is becoming increasingly popular, and there are a lot of hybrid environments out there. As I was saying, the Runecast platform enables us to actually see what's going on in the cloud and on premise, both at the same time. So it's really powerful in that, and it brings us that single source of truth. So Runecast started off in the cloud with AWS, and then we brought in Azure monitoring, and now we're proud to tell you that we have Google Cloud Platform monitoring as well. So Runecast now stands firmly as a cloud-native application protection platform. And we're really proud of this. And this is an amazing release, and it's really brought some great insights that are going to really help you out in your environments. But what does it mean when we start looking at the cloud? So with all cloud providers, they're duty-bound to secure the underlying infrastructure they provide, but they don't provide solutions for you to monitor your overlying deployments. So whatever you put in the cloud is your responsibility to secure, And Runecast, as I was saying, provides that single source of truth that we need to ensure our cloud workloads conform to best practice and are protected from vulnerabilities and conform to security compliance requirements as well. So I'm not going to dig right into what we've got for GCP at the moment. Steve's going to be showing you that a bit later on, so I don't want to spoil his demo. But Steve, as we move on and we start to have a look at Kubernetes and what's going on there, do we have any questions coming up at the moment?
No questions so far, Steve.
Okay, so as I was saying earlier on, and I'm sorry, I forgot to repeat myself when we started off. If you guys do have any questions at all, we do have the Q&A section. So please feel free as we're going through to pop them in there and we'll answer your questions for you. So Kubernetes management. So until now, Runecast has provided checks on cluster roles, cluster bindings, nodes, namespaces, and pods. And in 6.2, we've now included container image scanning, which allows us to go deeper and check into application vulnerabilities in containers. So obviously this enables Runecast users to gain further vulnerability and security compliance, but it also allows you to take a shift left approach to container deployment. And we're going to have a little look at that in a second, just to explain it a bit. So for those of you out there who are not sure what the shift left approach is, just so that you can get a great idea about how that works and how that's going to work for you. So with Kubernetes management, we have 4 stages to releasing containers into production. So we have our plan and design, develop, test, and then we're going to deploy it into our production site. So the problem with this traditional release model is that when we get to deploying into production, we're releasing unsecure containers, which leave our workloads open to attack. So, once again, just to repeat that, we're going through the plan and design, we're developing and building, we're testing, putting that in a test environment to make sure it's good to release, and then we deploy and release that out into production. So it's only at that stage when we've deployed into production that we start to monitor and analyze for vulnerabilities. And this can already be too late. So what we need to do is we need to take this shift left approach. So we need to take, as Steve will show you in the demo, the shift left approach. By using Runecast, we can actually monitor and analyze our container images against 3 levels of admissions. But what is the shift left approach? So as with the traditional approach, we're going to plan and design, we're going to develop and build, and then we're going to monitor and analyze. But what we want to do is actually stop there with the monitor and analyze. So sorry, I said as with the traditional model, but yeah, we plan and design, we develop and build, but now we're monitoring and analyzing. So what this means in real time is that I can actually check, and we can use Runecast for this. We can check our container images and make sure that they're actually secure before we actually put them out to our test environment. So this is really important. We can monitor and analyze our container images against 3 levels of admissions policies before we release them for testing. And in real times, what this means is that we're not putting anything that's exposed into our production environment. So we know we've checked against the latest vulnerabilities, and we're not firefighting anymore, because when we come to deploy and release, and then we're on to monitor and analyze because it's already out there in production, the way that Runecast works with our weekly updates means that any new vulnerabilities that are put out there, we're going to be monitoring for, but we already know that we've secured those containers. So we're not actually looking for anything post deployment. What we're doing is we're checking any new vulnerabilities that come out. So this makes your team really proactive in the work that they can do, and they're not firefighting. So we haven't put something out there that we need to be checking from the start. We've already secured that, and now we can just check for those new vulnerabilities that have come out and our team is proactive. So hopefully that explains to you this shift left approach. We're going to explain that a little bit more. Steve and Marcus are going to help us out with understanding that a little bit more a bit later on in the live demo. And before we jump into our ITOM integrations and usability improvements, Steve, do we have, sorry, I can't see at the moment, but do we have any questions that have popped up at the moment, or?
No, still the same situation. No questions have appeared so far.
Okay, and please, everyone, feel free to pitch your questions in. Okay, so what's new with ITOM integrations and usability improvements? So the first thing that I'd like to discuss here is OpenID Connect. So for those of you who are not sure what that means, it means simpler integration for your team. So OpenID Connect is when, for example, you have your Google account at work, but that allows you to also enter different aspects of your work. So for example, if you're logging into Jira and Confluence, it will ask you to log in. Do you want to log in using your Google account? So we use this every day without even realizing what we're using, maybe. So just to understand OpenID Connect and how that works, that's going to make your life a lot easier for integrating with Runecast. And that means that, especially if you've got a smaller team and you're not using Active Directory or something like that, you don't need to set up individual user accounts. We can use OpenID Connect and connect straight in for our users. So we also now have Jira Service Management integration. Jira Service Manager is a ticketing system. So we started off with ServiceNow, but now we have integration with Jira Service Management. So if you're using that, that's going to be really helpful for you. You can actually send the tickets directly from Runecast to Jira Service Management and set up your tickets for your administrators. We've also introduced the not analyzed issue state. So what this is doing for us is, it might be that you don't scan every single day. It might be that you run a scan once a week because you have a small team. Or maybe you just don't have so much to stay on top of and you don't need necessarily to keep scanning so much. But what happens when we release a new knowledge definition? You don't know that we've released that, and there could be some issues and vulnerabilities that we've included that you now don't know about. You don't know that you need to go and check against them. So when you come into Runecast, it's going to tell you with the not analyzed state that actually it's a good idea to run a scan now because you need to analyze against these issues. So that's another little touch, and something which is trying to keep you informed so that you can stay on top of your environment. We have new performance and usability improvements. So Steve's going to show you the usability improvements when he runs his demo. And the performance for Runecast, we've really stepped it up and made sure that everything's running super smooth. So that's another great thing that's been introduced for this release. So before I do death by PowerPoint on you, I just have one last slide for you guys. So we've also released some new security compliance. So this is STIG for VMware vSphere 7. We've also got STIGs for Linux RHEL 8. We introduced before this release, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone's aware of it because it came out just before this release, NIST profile for Azure. And we've got the BSI profile for Windows OS as well. And obviously, we do release new vulnerabilities, new best practice once a week. But with this release, we introduced 26 new Linux vulnerabilities and the critical MS vulnerability that you can see there at the bottom. So that's my death by PowerPoint for you. And I hope that that was informative for you and it's given you a nice overview. I'm going to hand over now to Steve. So Steve, do we have any questions coming up at the moment, or?
No, still no questions at the moment.
Okay, and as we were saying earlier on, please feel free to throw those questions in there. So Steve, if you'd like to take control, I shall hand over to you for the live demo.
That's great. Thank you very much, Steve, for introducing those new exciting features in Runecast version 6.2 and their importance and value that they bring to both new and our existing customers. So let's get into the demo of Runecast Analyzer and show off these features. So let me just share out my screen. Okay, before we get into the new features, there'll be, I'd imagine there'll be a few folks on the webinar that may not have seen the user interface for Runecast. There'll be many of you that will recognize this user interface. So what we're looking here, just to put a bit of context around this before we dig in to looking at Google Cloud Platform coverage. This is the main dashboard for Runecast Analyzer, and we are analyzing across all the different systems here. We're showing configuration issues by severity across all of those platforms. We're looking at best practice adoption, vulnerabilities detected. We've got some knowledge base articles there. This relates to the VMware environment. And we break this down by configuration issues by layer. So just to run through the systems that we cover, VMware, it's got a couple of vCenters there, VMware Horizon, we've got an NSX team manager connection there, VMware Cloud Director, Kubernetes, which we're going to dig into a little later on for container image scanning, which Steve has already covered, but we'll have a look at that. And even operating systems as well, so Linux and Windows devices. But you can see here we have, as Steve's already mentioned, we have AWS as one of our coverage for cloud. We also have Microsoft Azure, and now exciting that we've now got Google Cloud Platform. So we're going to dig into that now. So I'm going to click on that one, and the dashboard will change to look something like this. Now this dashboard very much aligns with what you would see for Azure and AWS. So again, we're breaking down the issues by severity here. We've got that best practice adoption, which is a fairly new environment for me. So not much going on here. This will obviously grow in time and things will change. We want to get that best practice adoption up to 100%. And then we've got configuration issues by layer. So we're breaking that down into management, virtual machines, compute, network, and storage. And these are the profiles that we're analyzing against. And you can see there the number of issues and objects. So what we're covering for Google Cloud Platform is Google Cloud Platform General Best Practices and the CIS Security Compliance Framework. You can see at the bottom here, we have a history of findings. This will grow over time, but we do have the ability to we've got slider bars here as standard that we can zoom in on points of interest there to see where perhaps things have changed over time. So if we come back to the main menu, these are the configuration analysis. We've got best practice, security compliance, and we're also going to look at the configuration vault as well, where we can see baseline comparisons with different objects within Google Cloud, and also look at configuration drift. We have an inventory view here. Just briefly show you this. This is a breakdown of those objects and issues. I can simply click on the VM instances here, and this is giving me a list of the CIS security compliance framework objects and general best practice as well. So we've got some majors there. So that's one way of looking at it. We've got an all issues view as well, where you can see everything from a bird's eye view. We have the ease and the ability to look with the filtering tools options at the top here. We can go back in time. We can look at different aspects of this. Now, what has changed here? We've now got this percentage bar. So before we used to show objects that were passing and objects that were failing, passing with green, failing with red, and then an overall status. Now, again, with our environment, in order for something to pass, it has to have all of the objects passing, having a passing status to get that overall status of passed. But you can hover over each of these and it'll tell you how many objects. We've got one failing there. As I scroll down, we can see that there's a split there. But some of them might have 20 objects and it will show the split there. But to get to an overall pass, you would need to have all of those objects passing. Let's get into the best practices. So I'm going to just pick on one. We'll look at an example, and this is just to highlight the simplicity and ease and use of Runecast Analyzer. So we've identified these best practices, and we've got certain things that are failing, certain things that are passing. We'll look at this one here. We've got a couple of cloud SQL databases that should not have a public IP address. So single click, and we have all this information at our fingertips. So the description there that we just outlined, we have the remediation steps. So this is using the Google Cloud Console and what we need to do there. We've also got some information about the command line that we can use as well. There's also some notes under the section and some references. If we go across to the right-hand side, again, this is all very familiar. This is standard throughout Runecast Analyzer solution. We have the issues details there, but we can have a look if we wanted to at the issue ID, and we can go to the original sources. So all of that information is there. So name of the game, obviously, with best practices, we want to, obviously, with our Google Cloud Platform and any of our other platforms, is to follow that best practice adoption and get that level as high as we can. So turning these two objects to green. What are those objects? We can go to the analysis findings here. And in here, this is showing my two SQL databases there. And there you go. We've got these public IP addresses that we need to change in order to follow that best practice guideline. If we now dig into the security compliance, so for Google Cloud, we have the CIS framework. Again, very much same look and feel. This percentage bar is now common throughout all of the functionality and platforms within Runecast Analyzer. We've got 81 issues here. Again, I'm just going to pick on one. Let's look at this, ensure that the cloud DNS logging is enabled for all VPC networks. So again, single click, in we go, we get the description, the rationale, all of the information that we need at our fingertips to be able to go in and modify this so that we can be compliant against this particular thing, this particular item. And again, our analysis findings there. There is our device, cloud DNS logging, it's not configured. Again, the object of this is to get as compliant as possible. So we're turning these objects into green and getting an overall status of passed. We also, as standard, are able to export, if you've got auditors in and you need to prove that your Google Cloud Platform is compliant and you've got auditors in, we've got the ability here to export out to a CSV format or a PDF. We can also include all of the affected objects, so detailed, or we can untick that and have a very sort of high level report. Very useful when you have those auditors in and you need to prove that you are compliant. Let's go on to the configuration vaults, and I'm gonna just change across to another environment I've got because I have more information in this other environment for baseline and historical changes. So I've just flipped over. Now this is all new up at the top here, this configuration vault menu here. So we've got this inspector, baseline comparison, and historical changes. And we are able to look at view different objects within here. So the default here is looking at VM instances, and I'm going to probably stick with that for the purposes of the demo, but we can go and look at cloud storage buckets, DNS policies, firewall rules, SQL instances, and so forth. And I've got, overall status of what's going on. I've only got 2 VMs here, but imagine I've got 50 or 100 VMs. I can see what overall status is. I've got one running, one terminated here, machine types here, and perhaps what zones they're in. And, I can then, from this inspector, if I want to do a baseline comparison, perhaps with my running machine, my running VM to perhaps the terminated one, I can click on these 2 blue arrows here, and it's telling me there are 3 changes. So I can click in there and have a look at the changes. Now, one of the obvious ones, of course, is We've got a status, one that's running and one that's terminated. It's pretty obvious, but this information here, the CPU platform is different, and the discount is different. So if you've got a gold image in there and you want to, compare and do baseline comparisons, this is a very, very powerful tool, the Configuration Vault baseline comparison. This is where you come to look at where you can see changes that have occurred within your environment. And finally, on this bit, the historical changes, if I click on that, what this allows me to do, and again, as your environment, your analysis, you're doing that maybe daily or every 2 or 3 days, you're building up a history. What we're able to do is a baseline analysis. We can go back, we can select the latest analysis here. We could go back in time. Not going to be able to go back too far in this particular lab. Click apply, so on VM instances here, and I can see what's changed. There's only one particular change here, and I believe it's the discount. Yes, it is. So this is just highlighting that, in that period of time, we've added some disks to that running machine there. Now, if we'd have added more virtual machines into our Google Cloud Platform, we would see something on this bar here to say that, X amount of objects have been added, X amount of virtual machines have been added to that. So that's the power and of the Configuration Vault, to be able to come in and inspect, come in and do baseline comparisons, and to look at historical changes. So the key benefits of the Google Cloud Platform: customers are now able to analyze their workloads irrespective of which CSP they are utilizing, as we're now covering the big three in AWS, Azure, and now GCP. So this is going to help our customers with their configuration and security posture management, no matter what the CSP is. It's also very much, I hope you've seen, it's a proactive approach to analyzing GCP against best practices, and of course that CIS compliance framework. Customers will also have greater visibility into how their environment is configured at any given time, as we've just seen, as we've just run through, being able to do baseline comparisons and historical changes. But not only that, adding GCP to Runecast really does enhance our solution as a complete CNAPP solution for multi-cloud and hybrid cloud environments. I'm going to take a little breather there. Steve, have there been any questions that may have popped up?
No, we don't have any currently, unfortunately. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat.
Yeah, please do. Any questions, please drop them in the chat window. Okay, let's move on to the next exciting feature that I want to cover, which is the Kubernetes container image scanning. So before we dig into that, I've just gone back to the main dashboard. Now you can see here under the main menu, we've got image scanning. Now this will only appear if you are connected to a Kubernetes platform. So if you connected Runecast Analyzer to a Kubernetes environment, if you haven't got that in your environment, image scanning will not appear here. So what I'm going to do is drop into the Kubernetes dashboard. And as before, what we were able to do is best practice adoption, security compliance, and do vulnerability management against clusters, nodes, and pods. With this image scanning, this functionality will allow our users now to find vulnerabilities that are not strictly Kubernetes related, but are present in the container images that are used in their infrastructure. So essentially, it's checking the application packages inside the container image for vulnerabilities. So that shift left approach that Steve was mentioning earlier. So if I dig into the image scanning now, what we have here is a list of images that have been scanned over the last few days, few weeks. The trigger type has been a manual scan, and we'll get into a little bit more detail about other types of scanning when I bring in Marcus. But effectively, we've got admission policies. So what those do effectively This is specifying the level of exposure that is permissible for perhaps a new workload, as part of a development pipeline, to allow customers to include in their image scanning. So we have 3 of those. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but policy ID 1 might be perhaps used for a test environment. It's compliant. It'll run against that, and it'll say it's compliant if there are no critical vulnerabilities detected. You perhaps might use policy ID 2 for a pre-production environment, where we're looking at, there's no critical or high severity vulnerabilities discovered for which there is a fix available. And then perhaps your production environment, the most restrictive there would be using policy ID 3, where we're, it's critical, high and medium severity vulnerabilities discovered for which, there is a fix available. So we've got some history going on here. We've been running this Jenkins one, this Alpine image as well. If I just dig into this particular one here with no critical vulnerabilities that was run a couple of days ago, what does it look like? It gives us a list of the vulnerabilities. And as you can see, we have, what we're getting to here is we're actually showing you where we can, the fixed version that's going to resolve this. So if I was looking at this and I needed to get the critical ones resolved, I'd be looking at, with these particular packages that we're talking about here, the package name, I'd be looking to get that fixed version installed. Now, where there are perhaps critical ones here that there aren't a fixed version, then maybe you'd be looking at a different container image. How do we scan from a manual basis? We can go in and click on the scan image here. I can select the image that I want to scan, and I can select my policy here. I'm going to click the no critical vulnerabilities, click the scan, and it's coming back with a similar result that I had yesterday, but it's different from ones that I did 2 days before. So obviously those packages have been updated. And again, if we click in that, let's just click back in here. If I want more details on the particular one, I can simply click on that, single click, and it's giving me a little bit more information here and the description and the CVS scoring there. Now, I talked about doing manual scans. I think I'm just going to introduce and bring Marcus in for the conversation around APIs and how we can link this to software like Jenkins for that shift left approach and shift left pipeline. So, Marcus, if you would like to join here and
perfect. So, as Steve has mentioned already, various different ways of looking at the scanning of Kubernetes images, right? One being the manual scan we just discussed. The other being driven by Kubernetes' own admissions controller. The Kubernetes itself has a built-in admissions policy controller, if you will, that can be triggered as part of the deployment of containerized workloads. You then do various things. And by various things, I mean also different policies can be set. But this is also extremely helpful for anything that's related to the security of the actual container itself. So as part of our general image scanning capabilities, we've also introduced an API that's Kubernetes specific that will directly speak to the admissions controller, so to speak. You can see here in my development environment, we have a few more trigger types available than what was seen in the demo environment just before. So the Kubernetes admissions controller effectively, we can attach to the shift left conversation in the sense that it allows you to effectively attach Kubernetes image scanning from Runecast into your deployment process, right? So this is a webhook integration. It can be very quickly adjusted to your deployment process, and you can trigger the same policies as Steve has shown earlier on, which are these 3 type of policies. And you can think of them a little bit like, okay, this policy 1 is probably the least restrictive you can think of it a little bit forward. This is where I deploy into my test environment, because there isn't really any critical workload, any data that could potentially have a problem. Policy 2 might be your staging or pre-prod environment, because that deployment policy is already a little stricter. And then policy 3 really is, well, that's the most restrictive, right? And you would want to use that, let's say, for your production environment deployments and things like that. The inherent benefit of Kubernetes being it is very easily and quickly deployed, and generally, what you would call probably ephemeral workloads. They don't live very long. They can be spun up for a specific task and then destroyed again. Means really, for you to be secure and to have the ability to do vulnerability assessment, it has to be part of the actual deployment process. Unlike with potentially more traditional workloads, where there's a lot more time where this workload exists, where you can install something, you can do the vulnerability assessment, do the vulnerability management and the scanning, and then have a result that you can act on. Images, by their very nature, are closed-up systems, and very often don't live very long. So this whole process of scanning vulnerabilities has to become part of the deployment process. And that's, in essence, where the shift left conversation really came from. It was shifting the security aspect further to the left, i.e. further to the development process, rather than after the development is done. And I can see we have a hand raised. So let's have a look. If you have a question, please put it into the Q&A.
Yeah, so we have a question here about how AI is effective in the shift left approach.
Yeah, it's a good question. Generally, from a product perspective, a lot of the way we get to the information, because you have to understand, obviously, any sort of security standard, any sort of CVE, all of these things are effectively human readable pieces of information. And AI in this particular instance means our backend is a natural language processing driven backend that takes all of that human readable knowledge, all of these different types of pieces of information, whether these are CVEs or whether these are compliance standards, security standards, things like that, and then creates machine readable rules based on these. And these machine readable rules then feed into Runecast and allow customers to have a very pain-free way of adding new checks and new rules and new things to look out for in an automated fashion, right? It just makes the process for customers a lot easier, right? I hope that answers to a degree that question. But let me just go back to the conversation about types, right? So we've looked at these. The Kubernetes admissions controller trigger is it's built in the name. It's Kubernetes, right? And it will only work obviously with the Kubernetes admissions controller. And it's a way to include the image scanning that we look here in more bespoke deployment scenarios, right? But generally, most of us are familiar with things like Jenkins, right? Jenkins, Azure DevOps, GitHub Actions, all of these build pipeline providers. That's generally what we use if we talk pipeline and build, right? So what we've also done is we've created another API endpoint that can be integrated into the likes of Jenkins, right? To really become part of your development lifecycle, right? Again, thinking shift left, meaning we've got to move the security aspect of our workload much further to the left and allow that to become part of our development and deployment process, right? So I'm using here an internal to say I'm going to build with parameters. So let me grab an image that we would want to deploy. Let's do this. So we'll have a look. We want MariaDB and Nginx, and we can, let's say we're going to start with policy 1, and we hit build, right? So what happens now is this is now part of the build process, right? So this is part of my the team running a build for something new that I want to release, right? But unlike the other ways to train image scanning, where there is a degree of manual step involved, this is fully automated in the sense that Jenkins has now already sent this image to Runecast. And if I go back into my development instance here, and I do a quick refresh. Now, mind you, this is a development environment, so it might be a little bit slow. But you can see here, we've got MariaDB and Nginx. The trigger type was an API. We can see the policy was not compliant. Now, if I go back into Jenkins, I can also now look in Jenkins directly and can see what happened here. The status, I can have a look at the logs and see that this has not passed, and obviously there's a very nice red. Now, if we do that again, and we build one where let's use the same one, and now we do a less strict policy, or let's even do, yeah, let's try this one. This should work. Let's see if that one works. As he says, as he doesn't know whether it will work, but there we go. Now this one passed. Now the beauty of this from a DevOps perspective or DevSecOps perspective is the fact that it doesn't mean that your development teams have to do anything different than before. There is no different steps involved for the development teams to do anything extra or anything in addition in order to ensure that your containerized workloads that get deployed, whether that's into test, pre-prod staging, or any other environment, anything you build automatically goes through aspect of any image. And this, and I think this is really, really important to note. While the Kubernetes admissions controller is, like I said earlier on, by its very name, Kubernetes specific, this is containerized workloads. So that means that can be your direct Docker. It could be a different cluster, a different orchestration to Kubernetes, right? So anything with containerized image can be used here, and you can effectively then integrate your entire DevOps or your entire development lifecycle into your security lifecycle and ensure that workloads that get deployed as part of your build process are secure and free of known vulnerabilities, right? And it helps with things like your attack surface when it comes to anything that's part of the build process, anything that's part of the development process, without requiring your developers to actually do anything more or any additional steps, right? So that was me with a very quick update on that, and I know we're getting short on time as well. So I think Steve Bettison, if you want to take over and continue.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Marcus.
No problem.
In terms of, we looked at the percentage bar thing in the displays that's changed in this all issues view here. This is something that's new, we've already covered. But you also mentioned about the not analyzed state. So when Runecast Analyzer, when we bring out new compliance rules, or perhaps there are new vulnerabilities that are going into your system, and you haven't perhaps scanned your environment for a few days or maybe even a week, what you will see, and I'll just flip over to the other side, is you'll see this kind of status, and you're able to search using the filter bars here, which is what I've done already while Marcus was talking. And this is identifying these vulnerabilities that are in the system, but they haven't been analyzed yet. So what you would need to do there is run an analysis, and depending on what it finds, it may find that you are compliant, or you're not vulnerable on that particular vulnerability, or it might identify objects that you are vulnerable. So quite a neat, useful feature. I think it's going to be a real benefit to our customers. The other things that I want to just cover very briefly, and Steve has already mentioned these. If I go into the settings, two things. While we were talking about Google Cloud and Kubernetes, just to show you how simple it is to set up with Runecast Analyzer, how to connect to a Google Cloud platform connection. We just simply click on that, add GCP, and we need to provide a service account key there. You get your key, you choose your key, select it, and away we go. Once you've done that, you would then need to, in order to get some results in your dashboard for your Google Cloud platform, you would need to analyze against that. If we come down here to Kubernetes, as you know, we've already got a cluster connected to a head node there. I can add another Kubernetes cluster if I want. And again, very, very straightforward. We just need that API address, port number, and that SA token. Click continue, and we connect. And again, once that's been connected, we need to run that analysis in order to be able to see the results and see what's been discovered by Runecast. If I then drop down to the knowledge profiles, and Steve has already covered this, we've added for the DISA-STIG, we've added VMware vSphere 7 coverage, as well as Linux as well, RHEL 8. So there's the DISA-STIG. We've got vSphere and operating systems there, but version 7 there for vSphere. NIST, we've added the profile, added to that profile, we've added Azure as well. And this will continually, this is continually growing, and the different compliance profiles are increasing across the different systems that we support. And just to touch on what Steve mentioned at the beginning, we've added a lot of new vulnerabilities coverage for Linux. 26 new Linux vulnerabilities have gone in, and we've also extended the coverage for Windows Server OS as well. So some critical CVs have gone in for that as well. So I hope that's been informative. I hope that's been useful. Thanks very much to Marcus for jumping as well on the image scanning and really taking that into a lot more detail. Thanks, Steve, as well. If there are any questions, Steve, we'd be happy to answer them. Other than that, I think you have one more slide just to cover. If anybody wants to reach out to us and contact us, some addresses and things like that, I'll hand you back to Steve.
Okay, so currently we have no open questions, unfortunately, but if anyone does have any questions, we would definitely be interested to hear them. It's often the case that after you've watched a webinar, you then come up with some questions. So we're more than happy to answer them after the fact. If you go to runecast.com/contact, what this will do is it will pass you on to the relevant territory manager of where you are, and we'll be able to take care of you from there. We had a question earlier on which I didn't bring up and answer live, but it was, what's the price of Runecast? So Runecast is subscription based. And again, please reach out runecast.com/contact, because depending on the size of your environment will depend on the price of Runecast. And it also, we have different billing aspects to the different technologies. So that's a very difficult one to answer in a very short space of time, because obviously we'd need to know exactly what your environment entails. And
I would also have, oh, excuse me.
No, go ahead, Marcus.
One point I would also stress is, for anyone on the call who's not already an existing Runecast customer, I would challenge you, go onto runecast.com. You'll see up in the top right corner to download the trial. Just download the trial. It literally, and I'm not lying, takes 15 minutes to deploy Runecast. It's very, very straightforward, very easy, but it gives you a much better idea of what you can do with Runecast, and it gives you an idea to how you can deploy it and how you can use it inside your own environment, and get a very, very good feel for the benefit it can bring you.
There is one last question that's actually come in. How do customers do compliance for all this without Runecast? It's a very good question. I'd answer that with great difficulty. I think because of what our solution does, and all of that information that goes into our AI engine, to be able to analyze your systems could take, and if you're trying to do that in a manual way, would take a team of people hours, days, weeks, months. You've got the information at your fingertips with Runecast Analyzer because we've got that proactive approach. I don't know, Steve, if you want to add anything to that, or Marcus.
Yeah, I think that it's a really good question, and traditionally you have that break fix approach where something goes wrong, you try and figure out what that is, then you're Googling it, then you've got your answer, and only now can you try and fix that issue. So you don't have that single source of truth that Runecast is to provide you the information to say, look, this is going to happen in your environment. This is going to be an issue. Deal with it. And now it's not going to be an issue. So for something like, for example, VMware, it will tell you that you're going to get a purple screen of death, but you don't actually have that happening in your environment now. So I can look at that, deal with the issue, and then I'm not going to get that purple screen of death. I'm not going to get that downtime. And I've saved all of that time from something going down, trying to figure out what it is, trying to Google that online, because the information's right there at my fingertips and I can deal with it proactively before I have to firefight that.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to this is also the fact that I think in all of technology industries, we have always the habit of having a solution for a specific problem or technology. And every time you add a new solution or a new technology, this is not a replacement, it's additive, right? So for most of our customers, in a lot of ways, what we see is they start out with one type of environment, let's say VMware, and then there might be AWS, and then there might be some Azure deployments, and then there might be some containerized workloads. And like I said earlier on, monitoring and compliance aspects, they end up becoming additive. So you end up with one solution for VMware, one solution for AWS, one solution for maybe Azure, and another one for Kubernetes. And you end up with a team of people that needs to now deal with 3, 4, 5, 6 different solutions in order to solve one problem. And what Runecast does is it brings all of these technologies together in one place, in one platform, and allows you to have your team work with one platform and with one solution rather than with multiple different solutions. And it makes the whole process obviously a lot more streamlined, right? Because you don't have to train people on 4 different solutions anymore. It's one. And there's always also some cost benefit to that as well. That goes without saying. So really what Runecast provides is the ability to bring all of these different tech stacks into one solution that allows you to do continuous compliance across your entire estate in one platform rather than having to use multiple different solutions.
Thanks for that, Marcus.
Yeah, well answered.
So we're on top of the hour. We would like to thank you very much for attending this Runecast Insight. Again, I would urge you, please contact us at runecast.com/contact if you have any questions, if you'd like to find out more about pricing, about how you can get Runecast into your environment. Please feel free to contact us. We're always willing to reach back to you and to have those conversations. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this afternoon. And thank you very much, Steve and Marcus, for joining me in this Runecast Insight webinar.